Hello book fans, Robin here. I'm not in the conservatory today because the rain is bouncing off the roof, so you won't be able to hear me. I'm in my little garden office and I've got a few books behind me that I've just specially put there for you. In this video I'm going to have a little look at what I read during March. The weather hasn't got much better. Hopefully I can get a nice shot of the books outside and some beautiful garden scene, but so far not so good, so you may just get them on the shelf again. Anyway, let's have a look. If you remember back at the beginning of March, I was in the middle of reading The Dragons of Deepwood Fen by Bradley P. Bewley. This book is quite a thick tome. It's nearly 700 pages. It's got dragons, it's got magic, it's got everything your standard fantasy book has, really. Except it's a little bit more than that. And I have, on balance, I really enjoyed it. And I have to say, I would recommend it to read, particularly if you like fairly classic fantasy. It's got a few twists on the tropes, and it's not by any means like the Bulgarian or anything like that. It has some really interesting concepts, some really interesting themes. It's a little bit over heavy, or a little bit heavy on the exposition. There's a lot of explanation of how the world works, what the politics of the world is, what the magic of the world is, particularly the magic, what the dragons are, what the different types of dragons are, how they interplay. And that gets a little bit, especially in the first 250, 300 pages, a little bit, I don't really, well, you kind of do need to know it, but I don't want to be hearing this over and over again. I want to be finding out what the story is. And that made it a little bit tricky to start off with, but then once all that beds in cements, and some really good characters, some really good stories, really bits of intrigue, and there's factions within factions, which I always like, so you're never quite sure who is controlling whom. And the book actually really races to its conclusion once you've got over the sort of hump, the learning curve, if you like, of the universe. It is the first book in a trilogy, I believe. Definitely the things are left open at the end of this book. There's lots of things to resolve, so there's definitely a future book coming. But I really enjoyed it, The Dragons of Deepwood Fen. As I say, it takes a little bit of getting into, but once you're into it, the characters and most of all the setting, I think, kind of gets under your skin, and there's a lot there to enjoy. So that was The Dragons of Deepwood Fen, published by Head of Zeus and costing £25, brand new, solid hardback, lots of pages. Next up, also from Head of Zeus, is Jumpnauts by Hao Jingfang. Chinese author, female author, wrote A Vagabond, which I haven't actually read. This is like a first contact novel set in the sort of semi-near future, about 2080, I think. Lots of AI, lots of sort of smart devices and things. And it features three main characters. There's a lady who's a curator of a museum, which I think is called like the Terracotta Army Museum in Xi'an, and like a big old burial ground of a Chinese emperor. And then there's two sort of male interest characters in her. They don't fight over her, but they kind of vie for her attention. And one of them is the son of a sort of a billionaire oligarch type characters, and one is quite high up in the sort of secret police. And they end up going into space and having a first contact situation. It all ties back into some of China's imperial history going way back centuries. Turns out that, well, I don't want to spoil it, but let's say it's not the first time the aliens have been here, we just didn't know it. And it's a really interesting idea, classic ideas of what to do when there's a first contact. There's an interesting reimagining of how world politics might turn out, with two big factions against each other in a sort of Cold War situation. And then, of course, they're both vying to sort of make peace, or at least use the arrival of the aliens to their advantage. And then you've got some interesting interplay between the three characters, and then there's a fourth character who's a friend of all of them, who actually is probably the star of the show for me, kind of the George Harrison of the piece, if you like, keeping everything together and making the whole novel as a whole work. So I really enjoyed Jumpnauts. I would definitely recommend it if you like first contact sci-fi, especially if you're interested in Chinese culture and how the sort of, not only their sort of ancient culture, but also how the Chinese writers are viewing the sort of sci-fi world and where we might be going and what they're doing in sci-fi fiction. So thoroughly recommend Jumpnauts. Do check that out. The next book on my list is another sort of contact novel, and it's Alien Clay by Adrian Tchaikovsky. Now, I hadn't included this in my March list because the book hadn't arrived before I recorded that video on the 1st of March. And this arrived and I realised not only was I going to be taking part in the blog tour, which was last week, but I also would be going to the launch date, which I did go to the launch up in London. It's the first book launch I've ever been to, and it was very exciting. It was in this trendy bar in Hoxton, which kind of had this alien contact type scenario, and you went through and had a little cocktail at each one and had a chat to all the other people who had come to for the launch, and I met Adrian, and it was all very exciting. But I had read this by the time I'd gone to that. I got stuck in, got my homework done. Actually, it was quite nice to read something off list. Although it's quite nice to have the list to focus the mind, it was quite nice to read something off list. Can't think I'll do that every month because the list is bad enough as it is trying to fit everything in. You may have noticed, those more astute amongst you, that there are books missing from this pile which were on the March the 1st list but aren't on the March the 31st list. So Alien Clay, anyway, it's set in a penal colony on this sort of exoplanet. So we're in the future, we've discovered some exoplanets, and some of them have got life to various degrees of hostility. Alien Clay has got proper sort of fecund life, lots and lots of interesting creatures, but they're all pretty deadly. It's a very hostile environment, but it's about the most viable kind of the planets we found, the most interesting and most viable for life going forward. And it also has some structures which suggest an advanced civilization which seems to have completely disappeared. So it's kind of a penal colony. So although space travel and finding these planets is possible, they take a really long time. People are put into suspended animation and they're sent there, and it's a very dangerous process, or it certainly is, because they do it cheaply, because they're only sending convicts, and you might not even survive the journey. When you get there, everybody you knew on Earth is probably dead or at least 35 years older than they were when you left. And the central character is called Arton. He is a professor, or was a professor on Earth, and he kind of got caught up in so Earth is ruled by this group of people called the Mandate, or this sort of government institution called the Mandate, and they control everything, and they don't really allow dissent. But then Anton thought, or people thought, maybe they're loosening up. Well, they weren't loosening up, and they rounded everybody up and sent them off to this penal colony. Arton took a while to send up, so he's been sent later than some of the other people who are already on the planet of Kiln, where this novel takes place. So when he arrives, there's quite a lot of mistrust, because they think maybe he sold them out. So you've got this penal colony full of people who don't really trust each other. You've got a totalitarian dictator in the form of not only the Mandate, but also the head of the penal colony. He kind of uses people's mistrust and plays them off against each other. And then you've got this place is not only a prison, it's literally surrounded by millions of things that will kill you. The alien species are fascinating because they're very different. They've evolved in a very different way to the way humans would evolve. There's a lot of symbiosis, a lot of gene manipulation, not gene manipulation, but a little not manipulation, and people kind of almost like Swiss Army knife type biological creatures which can change their form and what they need, and they're basically trying to find a way of incorporating the Earthlings into their life and way of being, and that's kind of why they're so hostile. And as the novel progresses, I don't want to spoil it, as the novel progresses, Arton and some of the other members of the penal colony kind of begin to understand how Alien Clay works, and maybe why the structures were there. And then against all that, you've got the interplay and this sort of totalitarian society, and sort of power. So it examines power structures, and it also examines humanity's relationship with other creatures. What we would probably do in the instance where we did actually find alien life. It's quite interesting, quite telling, I think. It takes a little bit of work to get into Adrian Tchaikovsky. He's a master wordsmith, but he some of the language is it's very rich, which I love, but it does sometimes have you reaching through the dictionary. The concepts that are involved are quite complicated. There's quite a lot of scene setting before the ultimate payoff, which is definitely worth it. So do stick through it if you do read Alien Clay. I would thoroughly recommend it. Adrian Tchaikovsky is one of our greatest science fiction writers at the moment. I think he's incredibly prolific. I've realised this morning on my bedroom floor I've got another one of his books, which is out in the summer, waiting to be read, and he just writes so much about so many different varied things. Alien Clay is like nothing I've ever read, and you should definitely check it out. So we'll move on to the kids' books. I only read a couple of kids' books this month. I've read The Secrets of the Snake Stone by Pugh Dasgupta. Really fun adventure story set in Paris with a girl whose parents lived in India, and she's been sent over to Paris to sort of try and find a better life. She's a servant in this household, and there's this sort of legend of this snake stone, and the snake stone's gone missing, and then she finds this thing, and is it the snake stone? Is it not the snake stone? And then there's this secret society and a big kind of hunt for the stone. It's meant to give you immortal life, but it also has a curse, so it gives the bearer immortal life, but then everybody around them dies. It's a good book. I enjoyed it. It's similar to Alice Eclair books, which I've read and reviewed before, which are good fun. This one, in some ways I enjoyed it more. The Alice Eclair I think I really like. I like because it's set in just before the war. This is set, I think, in the fin de siècle Paris, so sort of 1900s. The Alice Eclair books are set in the 30s, and they hint at what's coming, which I quite like that foreshadowing. There's one bit in here which I really didn't like, which probably if you were a child who it's aimed at, you perhaps wouldn't notice, but there's a bit where somebody does something really quite odd, and it is a bit silly. But as a story, an adventure story, it's really good, and there's some lovely characters in it, some good solid children's characterisation of friends and who sort of again about who to trust, that kind of thing. And it's an enjoyable story. I would definitely recommend it. There's a second one I was quite looking forward to reading it. I think that's going to be set in India, but I won't say what happens at the end, but I think the second one's going to be set in India. And The Secrets of the Snake Stone by Pew Dasgupta. Do check it out. That's from Nosy Crow Books, and that came out on the 14th of March, I think. The Spectaculars by Jodie Garnish was really quite an entertaining read. I wasn't quite sure about this one because it's kind of a bit Greatest Showman meets Harry Potter kind of thing. But actually, I really enjoyed it. There's some fun characters. It's the second book. There's a first book. It's called The Spectaculars, which I would recommend you read. There's a little bit of catching up to do, and it's never as satisfactory when you're being told what happened in the first book when you're reading the second book. The concept is really good. I really like the idea of this sort of school for theatre children or for stagecraft. Some magic thrown in as well, and it's a really good, entertaining read. Keeps you reading till the end, and I would thoroughly recommend The Spectaculars by Jodie Garnish. My last book I'm going to have a bit of a moan about, and that is In Ascension by Martin McInnes. It was the February choice for Waterstone's Science Fiction Book of the Month, and 3/4 of the book I really enjoyed. It's a sort of first contact-ish novel as well. There's a lady in it who she is a marine biologist, and they find something deep under the ground, and then something weird happens, and then the astronomers start reporting on stuff, and then she's an expert in algae, and the algae is going to be the future for our food stuff. So she goes to this special project to do with launching things into space to try and make contact with this far-off object, and then it needs algae to grow in space so that people can be fed. And it's really interesting. There's lots of philosophical questioning in it. There's lots of interesting science in it, and then there's a sort of questioning the nature of shadowy government organisations who want to go to space, which I really quite liked. And then the last quarter of the book, I think I don't know. I mean, this book has sold a lot of copies, possibly on the back of being Waterstone's Book of the Month. I noticed it's also Blackwell's Book of the Year. And maybe I just missed something, but I just felt we were at this interesting point where we were sort of going to find out what the whole kind of mystery was, what's going to happen. And unlike Jumpnauts, where Jumpnauts has this fantastically satisfactory reason for why things panned out the way they did, and why the people who made contact and what that means, this cops out completely, does something really weird that doesn't really fit. Didn't really answer anything, and just left me feeling cheated that I'd spent the last 10 days, because it's not a small book, ploughing through it to try and find out what was going on. It kind of made a mockery of everything that had gone before. So I was really ended up being disappointed by that, probably more so than if it just hadn't been very good, because it was really good, and I just found it very disappointing. So, I mean, I'd hate to say don't read something. It is interesting, and maybe you'll find that you do like it. So, check out some other reviews. And if it floats your boat, then go for it. But just bear in mind that, I don't know, didn't quite reach the heights I was hoping for. So that's what I read in March. Pretty busy. The more astute amongst you will notice a few things have slid off the pile. Maybe they'll end up in April, May. Who knows? We'll have to wait and see. I'm getting further and further behind, but we'll see what happens. But I hope you enjoyed this video. Do let me know what you read in March. Do let me know what you might read in April, and let me know if you've read any of those. Let me know if you've read In Ascension, whether you thought it was good, or like me, you thought it was a bit disappointing. So until next time, I'll see you soon in the book garden, when hopefully the weather will be a little bit better. Bye.